Well, there we go. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for being here. I want to welcome you to the 2017 annual business meeting of the Jacksonville Onslow Economic Development, Inc., also known as the Committee of 100. My name's Ed Garris. I know a lot of you. Look forward to meeting some of you I hadn't met. I've had the pleasure of being chairman for the past 2 years. It's been very rewarding, but I'm ready to pass it along to somebody else after the next few days here. Before we proceed, I'd like to recognize a few special guests and elected officials. And if I can read Sheila's writing, hopefully I won't mess up anybody's name here. From Senator Richard Burr's office, Janet Bradbury, right here. And if you'll just hold your applause until I announce them all, thanks. Y'all are trained well. Adam Caldwell is the Greenville representative for Tillis's office, Tom Tillis's office. Thank you for being here. Colonel Russell Burton, commanding officer of New River, thank you. Now on to our elected officials. Royce Bennett, he's sitting at my place, vice chair of the Onslow County Commissioners. Bob Williams from the Board of Education, Onslow County, thank you. Mayor Anita Dingler, Mayor Fred Burns, then Holly Ridge Council, I believe these individuals are here, Greg Hines and Pam Hall. Thank you all for being here. Last but not least, Hans Miller, Sheriff is here. I forgot him last year and almost didn't make it out of here without handcuffs, so I wanted to make sure I got him in here this year. So anyway, let's have a round of applause for these people. Thank you. Next, we'll pause to enjoy a delicious meal that Golden Corral's prepared for us, thanks to Billy Sewell. Now I'd like to ask a gentleman to come forward to give the invocation. He simply wants to be known as Bob Dupuy. So, Bob Dupuy, thank you.
Thank you, Ed. My good friend Jeff Clark, that Jeff Clark, not that Jeff Clark, likes to begin his prayers a lot of times with, "Oh, great architect of the universe." I wouldn't be so cheesy as to steal that line, so let us pray. "Oh, great economic developer of the universe, we beseech thee, O Lord, that you bless this county and this group assembled here today with even more opportunities to create business. We promise to cherish them dearly, and in your name, use them for your glory, not ours. We recognize that a free and pious people can do more for our brothers and sisters when there is good and meaningful work to occupy and challenge us. Please bless this food we receive today, and may it nourish us to do your will more fully. Bless the hands that prepared it. And Lord, we especially ask that your continual blessings be on those men and women that serve in harm's way this day on land and on the sea and in the air, and their families that await their safe return. Amen. Amen. God's neat. Let's eat.
Now for the fun part of the meeting, the business meeting portion of our meeting today. So I'm going to call the business meeting to order for 2017. We do have a quorum by attendance, so we are allowed to do some business today. The only business item on our agenda is the election of our 2017 and 18 directors. As a reminder, our organization is led by a dedicated group of 18 elected members and 20 ex officio members who give unselfishly of their time and energy to help us make Onslow County a better place to do business. The 2016-17 directors are listed inside your program, so please take a look at your program. We wish to sincerely thank our departing director, Buddha Howard, who was the chairman from 2011 to 2013. We appreciate his contributions to the JOED board and economic prosperity in our community. He's not here today, but let's give him a round of applause anyway. Thank you to Buddha. The nominating committee has nominated the following individuals to serve expired or vacant terms as elected directors. Please see the ballot inside your program for the list. And nominees, when I call your name, if you will please stand and remain standing through the vote. The following individual is nominated to fill a vacated seat: Scott Riggs, First Citizens Bank. Scott is nominated to serve a 2-year term. And if you paid attention to your email, there was a slight mistake in there. It said 1 year, but this is actually to fill a 2-year term. That was Sheila's fault, not mine. Just saying. To serve a 3-year term, Harry Brown, National Dodge. I believe Harry's in Raleigh today. Millie Chalk with Duke Energy. She's gone on a flight somewhere, or? Okay. Susan Edwards with First Bank. Susan's not here, but she has some First Bank representatives in the audience. Thanks for being here. Joey Carter with Capital Choice. Joey's here. Sandra Fountain with Coldwell Banker, Fountain Realty. And Jason McLeod with ECS Southeast LLP. Jason's here. Okay. At this time, are there any nominations from the floor? I don't see any. Entertain a motion to approve the slate. Yes, sir.
Move approval of the slate of nominees and that we approve them by acclamation.
Okay. Well, we have a nomination. I mean, yeah. Well, we have to vote, but if that's okay with you. But we have a motion. Is there a second? Okay, we got a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed, like sign. Okay, you're duly elected. Let me see here. Let me get back on my agenda here. Okay, thanks. Thank you guys for your willingness to serve. I was supposed to ask the whole 2017-18 board to stand, so if you would at this time. Sorry to make you stand again. Okay. Thank all of y'all for agreeing to serve. Everybody give them a hand. Okay. Now, thank you for that. And I'm going to turn it over to Sheila Knight to give us an update. Thank you, Sheila.
As you can tell, we try to keep it casual. We want it to be fun and interesting. Ed has not yet used the gavel that we actually provided to him. But day's not over, right? Okay, I want to just give you a quick update. And again, I want to thank you for being here today. I know there are many schedule conflicts, so you had a lot of choices of places to be today, so we appreciate you being here. To give you a little bit of an update for our annual business plan, the 4 strategies that you see listed are the main strategies that were approved by our board of directors. We have spent most of our energy on the top 2, marketing and outreach and market and asset development, this year as we did in the past. Some of the things that we have done to reach those goals have included continuing to build the relationships with our external partners. The alphabet soup that you see here, the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina, the North Carolina East Alliance, North Carolina Southeast Partnership are certainly 3 of our most significant partners in addition to the North Carolina Department of Commerce. Those relationships are very important because most of our marketing is done in conjunction and cooperation with these groups. They are our major source of leads so that we work, so it's important that we maintain those relationships. Unfortunately, today is the same day as the Southeast Partnerships Board of Directors meeting, so I don't believe we have a representative of that, except that both Ed and Jason serve on that board, and I apologize if I missed anyone else. And Kathy Howard is here from the North Carolina East Alliance representing them, as well as we're very fortunate that the chairman of that board is one of our commissioners, Paul Buchanan. And I still have the pleasure of serving on the Economic Development Partnership Board in Raleigh. So we do and have built good relationships with those entities and continue to work very well with them. And that's been a focus of our board. Another part of our marketing and outreach program is continuing to be visible, to make sure people understand that Onslow County is open for business and that we're here and able to participate. And we do that through a variety of activities and events. We try to make it a habit to do community presentations as often as possible. So if you have an organization or a group that you would like for us to come and present and talk about what and who JOED is and what economic development is and how we impact this community, please contact our office. We like to do as many of those as we can schedule. We've also participated in, so far this year, 10 marketing and prospecting events, and they include trade shows that we might accompany, like the East Alliance or the Partnership or EDPNC. They can include consulting events where we go and actually meet with consultants from around the country that might specialize in industries that would be suitable for Eastern North Carolina and specifically Jacksonville and Onslow County. We go to various summits, so those are, to the extent that our budget will allow, we try to participate in as many of those as we can. It keeps us on the road, but it's kind of like, and Royce, I'm so glad you're here because, I always pick on the real estate days. Most of you know that my background was in real estate for many years, so that's the reference, the perspective that I pull from. And I know that most of us as brokers used to tell our agents, you're not going to sell sitting at your desk in your office. You've got to get out and meet the people to let them know, who you are and what you do. So we do have to leave the community often to go out and meet with the people that might have an interest in moving here. The networking and collaboration events take on all sorts of sizes and shapes. We're out there meeting and working with our partners and our allies so that we can continue to know about additional resources that we might be able to bring back to the community, as well as them understanding what we have to offer. So this is a big part of our marketing and outreach plan and takes up a lot of our calendar because we need to make sure that we're able to provide whatever support to our existing industries, as well as know what resources we have to sell to try to recruit new businesses to our community. Another part of the marketing and outreach, of course, is continuing to strengthen our branding. I think most of you by now know that in order to shorten the name Jacksonville Onslow Economic Development, we often refer to that as JOED, and I'm here to tell you that is now known across the state we're as JOED. Although we don't really care what you call us as long as you do call us. We have tried to identify ourselves by that. So we continue that branding, and through the constant support or nagging, I should say, of much of my staff, we continue our presence on social network in order to get our name and our message out as much as possible about who we are and what we do. We're continuing to tell the story of what's available in Jacksonville and Onslow County. Because great marketing and prospecting won't do you any good if you don't have anything to sell, a big part of our business plan, second strategy, is market and asset development. We work very close with several entities to make sure that we have inventory available, product to sell. We work with the City of Jacksonville on their business park for office and institutional opportunities. We're working with a private owner down in Holly Ridge who's developing the Camp Davis Industrial Park. The first phase of that product is due to be delivered here by the end of the year, so we'll have sites available and hopefully, and we actually have a couple of small businesses that are looking to move into Onslow County waiting for that location. We have worked very well with Onslow County, our Burton Business and Industrial Park. If you have not recently been here, then when you leave lunch today, I will ask you, after you leave the parking lot, take the first right and go 1 block and look, and you will see off to the right a brand new road that the county was able to put in last year through obtaining a grant through the Industrial Development Fund, and extended into the last 250-some acres that we have of the park, of the industrial zone section of the park. And then you will also see the framing of a new building, steel rising out of the ground, that we're very, very excited about, and I'll talk to you more about that in just a second. But the county has worked very hard on the extension of that park to give us more inventory so that we can have available to sell. We're also very excited about the emerging product that we have now at the Albert J. Ellis Airport. With the beautiful, obviously, new terminals that we have out there and the availability of product on the runways there, we have a new market available to us that we have found some great interest in. And then we work with all the local real estate brokers and owners in the community, trying to maintain a database of available properties that we can help market whenever we have any inquiries. As I mentioned, if you've not yet seen it, this is what our new shell building number 2 in our industrial park will look like. We're very excited about that. The commissioners approved building this last year in partnership with Jacksonville Onslow Economic Development. The building is going to be 30,000 square feet. It is expandable to 60,000 with 30-foot ceilings. We did a lot of research to determine that that was about a good sweet spot for Onslow County in terms of the type of industries and businesses that would find the rest of our assets, the type of things that they were looking for to consider in coming to our community. So we're very excited about this partnership and about this building and the future opportunities that we have out there. And it's been since this building was approved that we've actually qualified and received 3 site visits from prospective businesses looking for buildings, because typically they are looking for something that they can get in sooner rather than later. So we're very excited about that. Equally, if not more important, is the work we do with our business retention and expansion program. We visit and build relationships with about 25 existing industries in our community right now, mostly of a manufacturing base. When I say that this is equally or more important, it's because most of your new jobs traditionally will come from an existing business that is growing. And we're very fortunate right now that we have quite a few of our existing industries are growing, and that's actually where we're focusing a lot of our industry right now. It's very important, we think, to develop a relationship with them so that when they need something, they know who to call. And you've all heard me say this often, they can call us for anything. I hope they will consider doing that. We want to help them focus on what they do. We want them to do their business, but if they need anything regarding the community, even if it's a phone number, we want them to call us so that we can help them grow. And stay in our community. So we regularly visit with them, regularly call, and stay engaged. And that is a very, very important part of our program. In fact, if you do not recognize a lot of the logos or the names on the next 2 slides that are in our community, then I'm going to ask you to watch for some future JOED events. Although we are very, very blessed in this community to have, obviously, the United States Marine Corps be our main economic engine and give us quite a bit of economic stability in our community, we actually have a great diversity of businesses in our community that I find a lot of people still are not aware of. And we're going to actually try to make that our mission in this next coming year to help make them a little more visible. Not that they need it from a business standpoint. Most of their customers are not necessarily in our community. But we think our community needs to be sure that they know that they're here, know the role they play in our community, and make sure that all of us can reach out to them to show them how much we appreciate them being in our community. Many of them have been here for a very long time, and several of them they're in some good growth modes right now. So if there's a particular one that you see and you're not aware of, by all means, give us a call. We'll be happy to make you aware. We're very, very proud of the employers and the businesses that we have here in Onslow County. One of the challenges we run into when we're out recruiting and trying to sell Onslow County, quite frankly, these days, is addressing the workforce issue. Workforce is literally probably the number 1 or the number 2 points of conversation that comes up with any business or industry that's looking to locate anywhere. And workforce is not just numbers. Many of them might have specific educational requirements, skill requirements, all sorts of things regarding their workforce. And most of them know what kind of demographics they need in order to pull their workforce from. But quite frankly, when you're not a metropolitan area, you're not a large, urban area, you do run into a numbers game. So one of the things that we have discovered helps us is in trying to sell our workforce is realizing that our workforce is not just within the boundaries of Onslow County. So one of the marketing pieces that we have developed to show how much workforce we have available is actually a map. And this map, which is a radius of 50 miles, outside of a central point inside Jacksonville, North Carolina, and again, part of this is in the ocean. But the real selling point, and now when we're showing this, I'm finding that the eyes are lighting up, is that if you actually count the population within that circle, you have 735,000 people. Many of you might not have been aware of that. I heard somebody say, oh, that's a big deal. So now when we're on the road and trying to sell, coming to Jacksonville and Onslow County to locate your business, we actually can let them know that within about a 50 50-mile radius, a 50-minute drive, which is considered very acceptable for most businesses and industries. They have access to a larger population than many realized. That becomes important because most of them usually know how many, what kind of population it's going to take to pull their workforce from. And I'm looking like Donna and Kathy sitting over there, I think hopefully are nodding and realizing that the numbers do count. And it's important for Eastern North Carolina to share that we actually do have the available population and demographics to pull that workforce from. So that's one of the things that we must do in selling our workforce, is making sure they understand that the demographics are there. From an organizational standpoint, we've had a few changes since last meeting. Many of you may certainly have remembered that Dan Oliver retired on us as our deputy director. In fact, Dan would be here today, but he and Ruth are literally leaving for Europe for a 2-week trip today. So he sends his apologies. But Jeremy Schmidt joined us as deputy director. It's come on board. Laura Bigley joined us as our office coordinator, and unfortunately, I'm sad to inform you all that she is leaving us. She is moving back to Georgia to help take care of her parents and family. So we're going to bid goodbye to her actually next week. We're going to thank her for being on board and all that she's done. She's been a great asset. I hate losing her. I will forgive her in about a year. Yeah. But I also right now want to share with you, you may have been confused when you walked in terms of exactly who's on the JoEd staff, because you probably saw that Cheryl Bear, who was with us last year and left to go off to get her graduate degree, and she's in school, and Mel Kennedy, who left us a couple years ago because she got a really good job offer, are back with us today. So we're having a little bit of a JoEd reunion of staff, and it also goes to show you I did not chase them away. They still believe in JoEd and what we're doing, and we're very appreciative. Thank you all for coming on board today to help us. We appreciate it very much. Whoops, backwards, hit that wrong. Okay, I will share with you right now that of the 60-plus leads that we've gotten so far this year, and working hard to hopefully be able to be considered for every one of those. We are currently working 6 new industry projects and 4 existing industry expansions. These numbers have grown over the last few years, and although that may, in numbers-wise, may not sound like much, I'm hoping that my economic developers over there will tell you that these aren't just leads that we've gotten paperwork on. These are leads that we are truly working, that we've had site visits, that we've had back and forth communication, that we are actually in the running and trying to compete with. And Dan, a long time ago, told us that an organization our size, if we had 3 or 4 or 5 projects that we were working, we would be slammed. I'm here to tell you, we're keeping busy. Donna and Kathy are shaking their heads, but we're excited about it, especially the industry expansions, to be honest with you. When you have a company in your community that is looking to grow and you can help them either find resources or find ways to do that, it's very exciting because that means jobs, and it also means that they're happy doing business here. And that means the community is doing things right. So we're very pleased about that. Thank you. Final thought, and I know you've all seen me use this in every presentation I've ever done. Economic development is a marathon. It is not a sprint. It is not for the faint of heart. You have to have a long-term plan, and you have to work that plan. It's very important to continue because you have to, in order for us to be put in a position of being able to be competitive in this incredibly competitive world of economic development. You've often heard me say real estate is competitive. When we were real estate agents, commercial real estate was more competitive. Economic development is professionally bloody. We all treat each other very professionally, but when it comes right down to a project, there's not much one of us won't do to knock the other one out. See the boot? That being said, I want to thank my board, past and current, because the economic development in Jacksonville, Onslow economic development is like a big ship. It doesn't steer quickly. It's not going to move quickly, but it does require a very, very steady hand in order to keep it on track. It could be very easy sometimes, whether there be political wins or just lack of intestinal fortitude, probably to take your hands off the wheel and let it veer off course. So it is very, very important, and sometimes it takes an awful lot of vision to keep it on course. And I think our board is doing a really good job. Over the 7 years, it'll be 7 years, by the way, in July, that I have been with Jacksonville Onslow Economic Development. And prior to that, I was on the board for 7 years. But I have watched this organization grow and build its program. We're getting ready to embark on a new strategic plan where we will take it to the next phase. But I have watched us grow to the point where we have product, we have visibility, we have the relationships, we have the knowledge, we have the resources, we have the elected and community leaders to the table that understand what it's going to take to, I'll say, play and be successful in this game. We're in a really, really good position. I think the economy is at the place now where we're going to, I believe, to see some very good results. I think the perfect storm is on us, and I'm very excited to be a part of it. But I want to thank my board. I want to thank our elected leaders for staying the course. You have to do that in order to be successful in economic development. It's so very, very long term. So I appreciate that very much. That being said, I would also like to thank those who made today possible. Like I said, my JOED staff, past and present, for being at the table. I'd also like to thank the staff from the Onslow County Government Center. They have a great group out here. They're incredibly wonderful to work with. I want to call out by name Randy Jones, Dave Bullock, Rose Thomas, and Chad Ray for making this happen. Without them, it wouldn't be as easy as it is. Dave Cotton, our interim county manager, please pass on our appreciation to the staff. They've been absolutely great to work with, very much. On your table, you will find a dashboard. It's just a snapshot in time of some key economic indicators for Onslow County. I think you'll find that it shows that we are in a good place, continuing to grow, and I think good things are going to be coming. If you have any questions on any of the numbers on that, see Jeremy. With that being said, I would like to introduce our speaker, because that actually is, I think, going to be the highlight of our day. Joe Stewart is the current economic director of the North Carolina Free Enterprise Foundation. It's a nonprofit partisan organization that conducts objective research and an analysis on candidates, campaigns, and voter attitudes. His bio is in the program. I'm not going to read that, but I will share with you, if you've not had an opportunity to hear him or see him on TV, then I think you're in for a treat. He has a unique perspective, of being able to give you kind of, I think, what most people who are in the business world are looking for, and that is basically, so what did the last election mean to me, and what's coming up next, and how will they impact my business? So please help me in welcoming him today.
Did you take the clicker? Let's use the mouse, okay. Thank you. I am Joe Stewart, the Executive Director of the North Carolina Free Enterprise Foundation. I appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I was telling someone at the table, if I was to do a presentation on the current political landscape of the state of Vermont, it would take me about 7 minutes. It's 98% white, and they're still mad that New Hampshire has that presidential primary thing. North Carolina's a little more complicated than that. We're in a state of flux in many ways, and it's made our politics much different than the politics of the state historically. So I'm going to move really quickly in respectful of everyone's time. But if you have a question at any point during this presentation, I'm glad to take those questions. We do get support from a variety of businesses, local chambers of commerce, trade associations, but we also have a corporate sponsor. High Cotton is the official bow tie provider for the Free Enterprise Foundation. High Cotton's cotton is grown in North Carolina. The fabric's woven here and assembled here. And we say we like to be the recipient of these ties because every woman loves a man when he's in high cotton. We will be launching a television show. The Free Enterprise Foundation is partnering with the Triangle Business Journal in Raleigh, starting in June on Public Television's North Carolina channel. It'll be a weekly show that recaps the political and public policy implications on business in the state of North Carolina, interviews with legislators, elected officials, corporate CEOs. This is part of the extension of our mission to provide information widely on what the impact on the state's business community is for things like taxation and regulation, a real honest discussion of how the things that legislators and local elected officials and the members of Congress, what they do and how it impacts the political climate of the state. So look for that. I will be wearing a high cotton tie on every show, although I'm not supposed to say that because it's public television, and I guess that Grover and Oscar the Grouch can't say that kind of stuff, so I can't either. This is a map of North Carolina's voting tabulation districts, about 2,600 of these across the state. It's sort of the building block of a precinct, but it's the way the state gets the data from the Census Bureau every 10 years for the purposes of reapportionment when we redraw legislative congressional districts. We went back and looked at every statewide election since 2008 and plugged in where voters had a choice between the Democrat, Republican, and a statewide office. Over that period of time, those several election cycles, did the voters in a particular voting tabulation district have a partisan preference? Did they lean more likely to Democrats or Republicans by comparison with the statewide results? This is a map of North Carolina's political topography. This is not what we think. This is not our guess. This is where voters who had a choice between a Democrat and Republican, how they performed over time. Darker red, greater intensity of support for Republicans. Darker blue, greater intensity for Democrats. So what we see in the changes that are taking place in North Carolina is that now more than half of our state's population is non-native, people that have moved to the area either from some other part of the country or some other part of the world. 53% of the registered voters in this state now are non-native. Almost 20% of the voters have lived in the state less than 8 years. So there's not a historical perspective on North Carolina politics like there once were. After the 2010 census, North Carolina was determined to be an urban state. More people live within a municipal jurisdiction than do not. We are the largest rural population of any urban state on a per capita basis. Texas is slightly bigger, but they're slightly bigger because they're slightly bigger. But North Carolina's politics now is balanced between urban and rural interest. And it's only balanced because we're at that point where it's about equal. But the growth in the state is principally in the major metropolitan areas. That growth is constant. Every year for the last 10 years, we've grown as a state by about 120,000 people a year. And all of that net in-migration has come as a result of people coming to North Carolina. The birth rates have been flat. So the increase in our population is principally from people moving into North Carolina. So what's happened is the historical political nexus of North Carolina is sort of imaginary line north to south through the city of Hickory. And everybody west of Hickory was a Republican and everybody east of Hickory was a Democrat. And it was harkened back to a time in the years following the Civil War. And it was more of a cultural phenomenon than anything. There were Democrats and Republicans for 140 years in North Carolina after the Civil War, but nobody was a liberal. Everybody was a conservative. Your partisan identification was really more or less aligned with those years. So what we see now is that the battleground has shifted, and even though the state overall is competitive, there's not a strong preference Democrat or Republican on a statewide basis over those several election cycles. The battleground's now the suburbs. Because that's where the voters live who have a tendency to support candidates in a particular election cycle that they like around a set of issues that are important to them in that election cycle. But these voters swing. Now, they swing politically. They may swing that way too, but that's not the kind of group we are. But they have a tendency to go back and forth between candidates. And sometimes even one candidate they supported in one election year, they don't support the next election year. There's a sort of a phenomenon where voters feel like their expectations in an election were not realized. I say, I have an ex-wife who can tell you all about the powerfulness of failed expectations. And voters feel this stuff very strongly. If they voted for someone in one election and they don't like them the next time, they're going to vote for somebody else. The partisan alignments are not what they once were. People are not rigidly aligned to vote only for Democrats or Republicans as much as they once were. Here's a close-up of the same map for eastern North Carolina. There's western North Carolina. You really see this Republican in the rural parts of the state and Democrats in the metropolitan and urban parts of the state personified. And here's the heartland. This is the I-85 corridor, Charlotte to Raleigh. And so in eastern North Carolina, you still have some vestiges of old eastern North Carolina Democrats. Some of it is still a reflection of the fact that African-American voters have a tendency to be very consistently supportive of Democratic candidates. But you can see the tan areas. There are a lot of parts now of North Carolina where voters just do not have strong partisan preferences like they once did. Here's Onslow County. Is anybody surprised? Can you guess where Jacksonville is? So as you can see, it's interesting, if you look at other counties in the state, sometimes even though a county may have a particular consistent performance for candidates of one party or the other on a countywide basis, like in Onslow, sometimes there's a lot of delineation within the county. Wake County and Mecklenburg, two very large counties, have a tendency to do very well for Democratic candidates in statewide races. But within those counties, you see pockets of strong support for Democrats and Republicans. But just thought that would be of interest for you to see the close-up of Onslow County. So welcome to the state that's home to the city of Charlie. It's a corridor along I-85, about 180 miles in length. It's Charlotte to Raleigh. And I tried Rowlett, and that didn't sound good. Plus, it's Charlie because Charlotte would want to go first. So it's the city of Charlie. And it's increasingly blending its urban identity into a singular sense. Even though Charlotte and Raleigh have very different nuances to their politics, increasingly the populational concentrations in that corridor will give it enormous political clout. Just mathematically, more legislative districts will be drawn in and around that area because that's where the people live. And so it's really the tale of city mouse and country mouse. Now, the thing to remember is in that story, it comes out that the country mouse leaves the city because he didn't like it. That's not how it happens for human beings. That's how it happens perhaps for mice. But the rural parts of the state will not suddenly become repopulated because it's enormously popular to live there. The urbanization of the state's going to continue. And in fact, of all of the growth North Carolina have experienced since 2010, about 560,000 new residents, half of that total has gone into just Wake and Mecklenburg counties. So the growth is very uneven across the state. But the people that are moving here from other places. And so they bring their political identities with them. And principally, this is where millennials live along this corridor. And that's a very significant populational cohort. 2016, the last election in North Carolina where baby boomers were the plurality of voters. Millennials generation they're going to take over now, just populationally. But interestingly enough, the thing we see in the state of North Carolina is with this urbanization, the political shift that's created. This is a political cartoon from several years ago. Michael Bloomberg was mayor of New York. He proposed that there be a limitation placed on the number of fluid ounces of a soft drink that you could purchase at any one time, as if no one was smart enough to buy two 12-ounce drinks. But when that happened, the people in upstate New York were not surprised. The big city politics in New York State has been a generational phenomenon. They know that the politics of New York City are very different than they are in the rest of North Carolina. We don't have that history. In 1900, the census said Wilmington, North Carolina was the biggest city in North Carolina. Port cities were the biggest cities in the 19th century. But now we're starting to see cities emerge that have their own political identities. They think of their politics in a way that's not necessarily reflective of the state as a whole. House Bill 2 was the first time it happened, where a city had a different agenda that didn't play out as well in the state. It's not the last time it's going to happen. And so we're going to see our politics shift from a historical sense of North Carolina more or less being a state of relatively small towns to a state dominated by the town of Charlie. So this is the North Carolina I grew up. I'm a native of Raleigh. Hell, I can remember there were parts of Wake County, there were Native Americans and bison still roaming when I was a kid. Now there's no part of it that's left undeveloped. And this is the most significant development. Now this is the Census Bureau data from 1990. The state's population, a little over 6.5 million. Not even a 3% of the state's population was not white or black. That's as diverse as we were. 3% of the state's population wasn't white or black. By 2015, almost 15% of North Carolina is neither white nor black. And this is the dynamic that we will face going forward. The estimates are by 2050, 30% of the state's population will be Hispanic. 30%. Now, right now, the Census Bureau estimates about 240,000 non-documented Hispanic residents in the state of North Carolina under the age of 35. People under the age of 35 have this funny habit of making other little people. And so that's where that population is going to come from. They will be native North Carolinians. They're born and raised in North Carolina. But we don't know what their politics will be because we have no historical sense of what happens when you have a large population of non-Native Americans who suddenly dominate your political landscape. So the other factor is, look, the state continues to get older. As baby boomers like me age out, we're making the state older, but it's the demographic change of diversity that's new to North Carolina. Here's a census map of the projection of population gain and loss over the next 20 years. The counties with a stripe through them have lost population since 2010, and they're only going to continue to lose population. And so what happens when fewer people live in a part of the state is the legislative and congressional districts become much bigger geographically to capture enough of the population to make them equal to the other districts. Plus, density of population has a tendency to shift your partisan ideologies to the left. The closer people are packed in together, the more likely they are to be liberal. And so some part of the changes taking place in North Carolina will be reflective of that as well. We'll talk a little bit about it. But if you look at the northeastern corner, the southeastern corner, and the western, a lot of that is retiree population growth, people moving in to retire into North Carolina. So that brings a very specific demographic profile as well. Let's skip over that for the sake of time. But the thing that's interesting here is the projections for the Census Bureau. That's the portion of the populational growth that will come from the various age cohorts. So even though millennials are a very big population, the growth in the state will be significantly older people as baby boomers age out and more retirees move in. So the age cohorts within the state will make it a far more complicated place politically as well. So what's happened in North Carolina is really the confluence of three rivers. This is a picture of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. That's a good analogy. The population growth will make a different dynamic because of just the larger size of the state, but it's the diversity of that population that becomes a factor. Other thing is that the changing orientation of American voters, principally younger people in their partisan orientations, alignment around party will be less significant. More connected voter is to a particular candidate, the more likely they are to be supportive of them. And the final part of this is the economy of the state is now shifting to become more focused on international issues. The leadership of our state's business community has a tendency to be people that have come from other parts of the country, other parts of the world. Now, the reason why I choose a map of Pittsburgh is the Pittsburgh Steelers fan club in the Research Triangle Park is the largest Pittsburgh Steelers fan club outside of the state of Pennsylvania. As the people move here, they bring their political disposition with them. They don't change suddenly and become North Carolinians. In fact, the scary dynamic of this is if you go to a Carolina Hurricanes game or a Carolina Panthers game, a third of the fans are for the other team because that's where they're from. And so they will not think of what has happened in North Carolina for the last 100 years as being a part of the decision they make for who they select to run the state through the elections. They will think of this stuff in a very different way. Here's the voter registration just over the last 8 years. The most dynamic thing we see changing now, of the voters in the state, about 40% of them are registered Democrats, 30% are Republicans, and 30% are unaffiliated. Unaffiliated gains are $10,000 voters a month. So within the next 3 months, unaffiliated will be more than Republicans, and within 2 years, unaffiliated will be the number one category. It's already the number one category in about 20 of the state's counties. Now, these people are not unaligned. They just choose not to register as either Democrat or Republican. But the other significant dynamic, if you look at the bar on the bottom, this is the racial composition of our voting population. These are the distinctions the State Board of Elections use. But look, in the category of other, meaning the person identifies neither as white or black, American, Indian, or Hispanic, 400,000 more voters in the other racial category just in the last 8 years. So the diversification of our population as a whole is also reflected in the voting population of the state as well. Now, this is a chart. My friend Paul Shoemaker is a Republican political consultant, went back and looked at his polling data over the last several years, and Paul charted this out based on people's self-identification, not what your registration was, but do you think of yourself as a Democrat or Republican, and do you think of yourself as being conservative or liberal? So the top line are self-identified Republicans and their relative ideology. Now, I should say Paul is a Republican, and so the way he charted this, the more liberal you were, it was a negative number. That's the way he looked at this. So think of 0 would be you're absolutely moderate. 0 would be you have neither conservative or liberal leanings. But what's happened over time is Republicans have remained relatively conservative ideologically, but the self-described Democrats in the state have become far more liberal. And the unaffiliated section, which is the line in the middle that mirrors the average of the state, has tilted slightly to the left as well. That's the impact of urbanization, is the politics have changed on an ideological basis as the cities have gotten bigger, and as the cities have gotten bigger and dominated the political landscape, the overall ideology of the state is starting to shift to the left. Now, here's the same voter registration stats over time, just to show you more significantly. Democrats, net loss of Democrats over the last 8 years, about 400, 500,000 fewer registered Democrats. Slightly fewer registered Republicans, a slight uptick recently, but you can see the bottom line, unaffiliateds. That continues to dominate, and it's a pretty significant portion of first-time registrants, people moving into the state that are choosing to be unaffiliated. Now, as you know, you can vote in a partisan primary as an unaffiliated voter, and that's a convention of the two parties. Either the Democrats or Republicans could say no longer can unaffiliateds vote in our primaries. I think that's unlikely, and it might change if suddenly you were not able to vote in a primary as an unaffiliated voter. But for all intents and purposes, I think this will continue to see a trend line where people just choose not to be self-identified as either Democrat or Republican. Interestingly enough, this is a breakout of the ideology of the state based on duration of residence. So entire life residents of the state of North Carolina have a tendency to be more conservative. The people that have lived here less than 10 years but more than 6 are far more liberal. So some part of that is the way the state is shifting as well. People moving in have a far different ideological orientation than the historic North Carolina voter. All right, looking at the 2016 results. Presidential race, U.S. Senate race, and the governor's race. Part of this new complexity of the state is there's not as much of a singular alignment around party. So you had Donald Trump, the Republican candidate for president, win, Richard Burr, the Republican candidate for the Senate, win, but Pat McCrory, the Republican candidate for governor, lost. And so some part of that, we'll talk a little bit about what that dynamic was. We're seeing this sort of going back and forth across the ballot, where voters don't feel necessarily the obligation to remain committed to a particular party. Sean Howe, the Libertarian in the U.S. Senate race, interesting. Look, he had 1 percentage point more than the other 2 Libertarian candidates running. Sean's run for the U.S. Senate now 4 times. Interesting guy. He's a Papa John's pizza delivery man in Durham, and he does these YouTube videos. He's a big craft beer fan. He drinks beer and talks about policy issues. And he ran for the Senate 2 years ago in the Tillis race, when Tillis ran against Hagan. And about 10 days before the election, he also acknowledged that he was a recreational marijuana user. So like beer, pizza, and dope. It's kind of profile. So the problem, Sean, is that a lot of his voters don't remember voting. And I don't know why that's funny. So here's the results in the elections of 2016. If you take the average total votes cast for Donald Trump, Republican candidate for president, Richard Burr, Republican candidate for Senate, Dan Forest, Republican candidate for lieutenant governor, if you average those together and compare them with the vote totals for Pat McCrory in these counties. Now, Pat McCrory lost by just a little over 10,000 votes, or closer to 15,000 votes. But if Pat McCrory, the Republican candidate for governor, had done just as well as other Republicans just in Wake and Mecklenburg County, he would have won. So that's the dynamic of such a large concentration of voters. But look, the vote totals, you get down to New Hanover County, 4,600 votes, fewer than the rest of the Republicans. That wasn't about House Bill 2, that was film tax credits. And you look at places like Mecklenburg and Iredell County, even Buncombe County and Asheville, it was a myriad of issues. So it's not just Charlie that develops a political identity, it's places like Wilmington and Asheville and Jacksonville, quite frankly. The voters feel the issue sets that matter to them most here matter most to them at all. And so they will vote for or against a candidate based on that candidate's identity with those particular issues. What Pat McCrory didn't do is make enough people not mad at him in enough places to win re-election. Yeah, it's complicateder than it's ever been. Now, this is interesting. The assertion, Hillary Clinton, the Democratic candidate for president, has said James Comey's announcement about the reopening of the investigation into emails in October cost her the election. That's probably true if you look at the way that the elections dropped off. But it wasn't true here as much. The voters that turned out for Donald Trump were rural, principally unaligned voters who don't typically vote in presidential elections. But this was a significant factor. And the reason why I put this slide up here is one of the things we're starting to see because of this non-native North Carolina voter profile, those voters have a tendency to be a lot more focused on national political trends. They don't follow the local news as much. And of the voters who said they voted for the candidate for president, they voted for that they felt that person would bring change. This is exit polls from the presidential race, not just in North Carolina, across the country. 25,000 people, 40% said the reason they voted for who they voted for is they believed that person would bring change. And Donald Trump won that portion of the electorate 83%. And so this was an election where people were looking for somebody who was not a traditional candidate. So I think that's what happened in North Carolina as well. Hillary Clinton did not recreate the coalition of voters, principally younger voters, that turned out for Barack Obama in record numbers in 2008. But we may see the trend in North Carolina consistently become more whatever's happening nationally is what will affect our elections here. Now, here's the vote totals for Donald Trump. The counties that Donald Trump won to get 25% of the total votes he cast. 5 counties, he carried enough votes to get 25% of the total votes that he got, 50% of the votes he got. In other words, the greatest concentration of significant support he got took 17 counties, and you see those counties highlighted. So to win the state, Donald Trump had to win these 17 counties significantly. Hillary Clinton's vote total, Hillary Clinton's vote total, 2 counties, Wake and Mecklenburg, were 25% of her vote total. Her total of 50% of the vote came from just 7 counties. So for a Democrat to win the state of North Carolina statewide basis, they've got to overperform in the major metropolitan areas. For a Republican to win, they've got to have a greater than usual turnout among rural voters. It's created this interesting dynamic in terms of how voters are reached. These are the media markets in the state. In the 2016 election, more than half of the votes came out of the media markets in the Triangle in Charlotte, and an overwhelming percentage of the votes came from the Triad market, when you throw that in there too. But so for Democrats to win, they've got to do really well in those large metropolitan media markets where the television advertisements are the most expensive. These are the congressional races. It's kind of a dense chart. That same voter analysis that I showed you in the first slide, we plug that into each of the districts and give it a rating based on partisan preference. Not an absolute predictor, but a pretty strong indication that voters have an attitude one way or the other. The voter registration stats in the counties, no surprises in our congressional races. 13 districts, 10 Republicans, 3 Democrats, that's what we have now. Probably the most significant thing to note is after the 2020 census, we'll get a 14th district. So they'll have to cram one in somewhere around Charlotte or Raleigh, I guess. But in districts like the 3rd district, where you saw those counties north of here that are losing population, those congressional districts will be reshaped enormously after 2020, just to get enough population to make them equal in size to the other districts. In the statewide races, we have 10 council of state, governor, lieutenant governor, 8 other offices. We have as many statewide executive branch officers as any other state does. No one has more than 10, but sort of an interesting collection of results. But this is the most significant thing. This is the order you see on the right column. That's the order on the ballot, and that's the bleed off of votes cast. So the presidential race, about 4.7 million people voted, and then each of the races below, that's how many fewer people voted in that race. Now, why this is significant, in 2012, we had straight ticket voting. About 2/3 of the voters selected straight ticket, meaning they voted for all of one party's candidates or the other. And so I thought the bleed off of votes cast would be dramatically higher in 2016 because people would have to go all the way down the ballot and vote in each race. These attrition numbers are not any different than they were in 2016. This is what happened. People went back and forth down the ballot. Instead of voting once and voting for everybody, they actually made a decision in each election. Not a lot of people, 1% to 2% of the voters. But in a state that's competitive to start with, a little tiny shift one or the other can make a big difference in the outcome. So we saw some different races. Now, a lot of these down ballot races, and I always think it's interesting, auditor is 4th on the ballot, and 200,000 people chose not to vote in that race. I'm convinced they see the word auditor, they said, I don't want to get involved. I don't want anything to do with that. That's bad. Don't even make eye contact. Just walk away from that. But there's not enough money for 10 statewide races. There's not enough campaign money available for these candidates to identify who they are and what the issue sets are within that office. In the insurance commissioner's race, Democratic incumbent Wayne Goodwin lost to Mike Causey. Causey had 1/7 of the money that Wayne Goodwin did. Wayne Goodwin lost because about 2% of the voters said his office as insurance commissioner, he's an incumbent, and Obama health care premiums went up. And so they assigned blame to him on that, and he lost an election even though he was better funded than his opponent. So we may see relative flexibility in voters' minds on issues relevant to these statewide offices going forward. There may not be the consistency of incumbency we once had in those offices. In state legislature, we take the same data, plug it into each of the districts. The rating of the district, strong Republican to strong Democrat, you can see there. Went into the election, Republicans had super majorities, ability to override a gubernatorial veto, both in the House and Senate. No change. House lost one seat, Republicans did, and the Senate, they picked up one seat, the Republicans did. Now, there were losses among Republican incumbents. It was in Wake and Mecklenburg County. House Bill 2 had an impact in legislative races in Wake and Mecklenburg County, but not anywhere else. And so where there were gains for Republicans were parts of North Carolina where Trump was doing well because of the dynamic of white, rural, not aligned voters. But we have really no difference in our legislative composition than before the election. We do have a lawsuit pending that would require the state to redraw some of the districts. These are the districts that would be required to change in the Senate and these in the House. It's not yet settled this would happen, but there's some possibility that in the elections of 2018, about 40 districts in the state legislature would be slightly different or significantly different than they are now. And so an incumbent has to run in a district where they don't necessarily know all the voters. That makes a slightly different dynamic. All right, so what to watch in 2018? Typically, the first midterm election of a president is a wave election. Wave means at least 35 seats in Congress change partisan control. In 2010, Barack Obama announced that the Democrats had taken a shellacking. It's probable that there is some wave dynamic to the 2018 election, meaning it will not be necessarily good for Republicans. Far more Democratic U.S. senators trying to protect their seats than Republicans, but far more Republican governors than Democrats trying to protect their seats. But I think at this point, it's safe to say it will be a wave. The question is, how big is the wave going to be? It really comes down to whether there's a strong economic attitude, that voters feel positive about the state of the economy. Typically, voters look at things like the stock market and the price of gasoline, unemployment rates, relatively speaking. So many bad hombres in this world. This is the dictator in North Korea. He's a bad guy, and he could do something that would completely change the voter attitudes. The 2002 elections, the first midterm for George Bush, was not a wave election for Republicans because the country was unified in the months following 9/11. If we had a significant event, which I hope we do not, that could change voter attitudes, even irrespective of economic activities. But there's so much bad stuff going on in the world right now. I'd be very surprised if there's not something significant that happens between now and the election. The governor's office is controlled by a Democrat and the legislature is controlled by Republicans, so it's a little like a bar fight. And if you've ever been in a bar where there was a fight or been in a bar fight, you know that it's not entirely clear what the people are fighting about, but it's possible that just being in the bar, you get pulled into the fight. And so that's kind of how it looks right now, and I think that's going to continue on through this midterm election. No U.S. Senate race on the ballot in 2018, so no significant reason for voters to turn out. There is one statewide race in the state Supreme Court, but that's not going to generate a lot of interest. So typically you have less than 40% of the registered voters, sometimes closer to 30% as the turnout rate in a midterm election where there's not a U.S. Senate race. Non-native voters. This is the most important thing to keep in mind. This is a poll that came out. Meredith College in Raleigh has a polling program. They just did an evaluation of voter attitudes on fake news, and they asked people to identify their sources for information. The most important thing is non-native North Carolinians said, fewer than 10% of them said they watched the local news. They don't even watch the local news. So people that have moved here from other parts of the country, they're watching CNN, or they're watching MSNBC, or they're watching Fox, but they're not watching the local stuff. So their attitude about the election year will be driven by whatever the national coverage is and less about what North Carolina-centric information there is. So it'll either be a little wave or it'll be a great big wave, but it's probably not going to be a medium-sized wave. And the challenge really is trying to anticipate what that is. I think principally the thing to watch is the economy. And if people are remaining hopeful, if economic optimism is high, then I think the Republicans will probably sustain through this midterm. But if people are pessimistic about the near-term financial future, I think it will spell toil for the Republicans. You know, one of the interesting things with all the stuff that's going on in Washington now, some speculation that the president may be subject to a vote of impeachment. I talked to a friend in D.C., interestingly enough, real quickly here, there is some speculation that if it did come to this, the Democrats would not want the president to be impeached now. They would rather have it drag out. Because the fear is if he gets impeached now and Mike Pence takes over and things aren't so bad by 2018, there's no implications in the election. The thing to remember is, some of you may be old enough to remember, there's this guy named Richard Nixon who was president of the United States, and he got impeached. He was going to be impeached, and so he resigned. And so who took over was the vice president, Gerald Ford, who had not been elected vice president because he'd been appointed because the incumbent Republican vice president was in prison. And so that's pretty bad for the Republicans going into the election of 76, right? Terrible stuff. Gerald Ford barely lost. And so the voters are not necessarily going to hold the Republican Party accountable for the misconduct of the president if it comes to that, if the economy is pretty good. And so a lot of what I think will drive the election of 2018 is singularly economic optimism. Here are the wave elections, the most recent term where the office of the president was controlled by Democrat or Republican. You saw how Congress was. The 63 seats that turned over in 2010, most significant wave that we've seen. 1994, Bill Clinton, the wave in his first midterm election, 54 seats. So from a historical standpoint, and of course, being the smart guy about politics from Raleigh, it'll either be big or it'll be little. So thank you very much. I enjoyed being here today. So what's happening going in forward is in 2020, there's enormous speculation about Democrats feeling a little bloods in the water for the Republicans. Now 43 people have announced their intention, including Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is now talking about running for president of the United States. So I want a Kanye West, Dwayne Johnson. I like that kind of match. I think that's going to be fun. Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, is talking about running for president. So the whole paradigm about who's qualified and who's a good candidate, Donald Trump, 45 presidents we've had, he's the first one with no previous military experience, no electoral experience. And so to some ways, whether you're for him or against him or like him or don't, this is what happens when one of us gets elected. I mean, this guy goes into it without any experience. And so that's part of the dynamic. But the presidency's not seen in the same way it once was by the country. More people that have a sense of celebrity as a result of what they've done politically, what they've done professionally, or some dynamic of their celebrity, that becomes more of what's an acceptable pathway to the presidency than a historical sense of getting elected for a few times and something else before you run for the president. With that, I'd be glad to take any questions. Yes, sir. Yeah. Well, I've been in politics 30 years, and it's very rare that a single thing has a dramatic impact singularly. It generally is cumulative. I think, it's interesting, Hillary Clinton in a recent interview said she felt the Comey letter had been pretty significant, and David Axelrod, as a consultant, said, I don't think James Comey told her not to campaign in Wisconsin. So, so there's always that as to it. And I think I'm starting to read the book now, Shattered, that's writers that were embedded with the Clinton campaign. The Clinton campaign basically made exactly the same mistakes they did in 2008. And they were so arrogant, they would not believe people that were telling them stuff they were hearing from the front lines. And so I worked with a lot of different candidates. Arrogance is always a hard thing to overcome. And I'm never wrong about that. So. Other questions? Well, thank you very much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Okay, thank y'all for hanging in there. If you could just hang with us about another 30 minutes, we'll let you out of here. No, seriously. First of all, I'd like to thank Joe Stewart one more time. Give him another round of applause. That was one of the more entertaining speeches we've had, so very good. Thank you. Before we get out of here, I'd like to thank all of our investors and our sponsors. As Sheila pointed out, it's a team sport, so thank y'all for hanging in there with us. Also like to thank the staff. We don't thank them enough. They do a thankless job. Sheila, who leads the team, along with Jeremy Schmidt and Laura Bigley. Laura, don't cry, but we are going to miss you, and we thank you for everything that you've done. Let's give them a round of applause if you don't mind. And before I make my closing remarks, I wanted to tell y'all a quick story of how I became chairman Dr. Lingle and Sheila pulled me aside and said, hey, can we meet with you? And, we'd really like you to get into the leadership circle here. I said, well, sure, and they talked me into it, and I agreed to do it. But as we were walking out of the Commerce Center, Dr. Lingle pulled me aside. He goes, Ed, I got to be honest with you. You're not our first choice. But we're really glad that you stepped up and were part of the team. So I went home that night to my wife, Paula, and I said, Paula, Dr. Lingle, well-respected, I love him to death, but he told me I was his second choice. Should I be offended? She goes, well, don't be too offended. You weren't my first choice either, so. Anyway, I really appreciate the opportunity to serve you guys. And this is usually the part of the agenda where we talk about everything that we've accomplished during my time as chairman. But I tend to want to remain focused on the future. I think we're well positioned for a positive future in terms of our executive leadership, the board leadership, financial viability, and our business plan execution. I think we've done a good job of that. So I think we are in good shape for the future. And for that, I'm proud. Thanks again for letting me lead the organization. And just one more thank you before we get out of here. I'd like to thank the county, Royce, for hosting us today. This is a great facility. Golden Corral, Billy, thank you for the food. It was very good. Being no more business to come before the meeting, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you for being here.